Good evening and welcome. We are live in Pahrump, Nevada for the special election CD2 Congressional Candidate Debate. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight's program is hosted by TRUNC and Western Representation. My name is Jerry Taylor-Swade and my partner in TRUNC is Laurel Fee. We are just two girls trying to make a difference. To learn more about TRUNC, please go to www.trunconline.com and you can find out what we're all about and what we're trying to do. Our hope is that tonight's program will give you, the people, an opportunity to hear and learn about the candidates that are asking for your vote. At this time, I'd like to introduce this evening's moderator, Pahrump's own Karen Jackson of KYNE Radio. Thank you. All right, at this time, I'd like to call the candidates up on stage, and we will start with Mark Amodei. And next is Nancy Price. And Kirk Lippold is next. Okay, and thank you so much. And I'd like to turn this over to Karen, who will be the moderator, and she will give you the rules for the debate.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, and welcome to the Nugget in Pahrump, Nevada. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for the U.S. Congressional Candidates Debate for the upcoming special election, which is scheduled for September 13th. To replace Dean Heller's seat in Congress for Nevada. Right now, we have no one in Congress voting for Nevada. So this debate is very, very important to Nevada and America. Representation is what our democracy is all about. The people's voice, your voice. And our sponsors tonight are Dr. Jeffrey Ross-Gunter, Morales Construction, Pete's Auto Clinic, Valley Electric, Precious Care, Funding Solutions, Wolfie's, The Winery, and Care Source. And also tonight, you were handed a straw poll. Please take the time to fill it out for us. We would appreciate that. And now, I would like to introduce you. We have both Democrats and Republicans here tonight. We have Republican Commander Kirk Lippold, Democrat Nancy Price, and Republican Mark Amodei. Now I'm going to give you the rules for tonight's debate. They're really rather simple. Each candidate will have only 2 minutes to answer each question. And in the lightning round, the candidates are asked yes or no, or one-word answers only. Our timekeeper, Tim Williams, stand up, Tim. We'll hold up the cards advising you, the candidates, of the halfway mark. And when the red card comes up, that's it, you're done. There will be no exceptions. The order of opening and closing statements and first question order were determined by a draw of the cards. All the questions presented tonight were submitted by the residents in Congressional District 2, the votes of the people you're asking for. Audience, if you would, please, in the interest of time, hold all of your applause from now forward till the end of the event. All right? I can't hear you. Oh, please, turn your cell phones off or vibrate. And before, oh, now it's time for our opening statements. And I believe, Mark, you won the round on that one.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for that time for the opening statement. Next. Good evening. Thank you, Nye County folks, for coming out and supporting what is one of our most richest traditions in the electoral process, and that is getting everybody in the same room, on the same stage, asking them questions, and getting a feel for that person. It is a uniquely rich Nevada tradition, and it's nice to see that it is alive and well here at the home of the Trojans. As Karen indicated, the seat that we're going to have a special election for on September 13th is presently vacant. After September 13th, the person that you choose will be responsible for filling out now Senator Dean Heller's term for 14 or 15 months. Phenomenally important time in the course of our nation, both in terms of the issues that are here in Nevada, that are affecting us all, whether they're economic, whether they're federal land use, or whether they're foreign policy related, which affects us here at home. Also a phenomenally important time federally as you watch what's going on with the debt, with the budget, with energy, with immigration, all the touchstone issues that have come to the fore and been so important to all of us, watching the new administration and watching the Congress back when it had a supermajority in the Senate and Nancy Pelosi was in control of the House. I look forward to participating and answering your questions and conversing with my colleagues up here, because it's a phenomenally important time to send a message to the folks in Washington, D.C. Nevada is a battleground state in 2012, and this is a great opportunity to set the stage for that 2012 run-up. Thank you.
And our next speaker will be Kirk Lippold.
Good evening, and thank you, especially for the TRUNC for hosting this debate tonight, and also for all the folks out there in Pahrump, as well as Nye County and throughout the state of Nevada. It is a critical moment in our nation's history and in Nevada's history. The blunt reality of it is we as a nation are at a tipping point. We have no representation for the 2nd Congressional District back in Congress right now, and it is imperative that we get someone back there as quickly as possible. The reason for doing that is without a voice in Washington, we cannot be represented as folks here. When you look at what is required for our nation, for what is required for Nevada, and for our future, we are facing some monumental challenges. First and foremost, the debt. From that stems almost everything else. When you look at the amount of jobs that we do not have here in the state, the high unemployment, the foreclosure rates, all those things, this is not the time for business or politics as usual. This is the time for someone to step forward with bold, decisive leadership. One person can make a difference back in Washington. One person can go back there and speak up on behalf of the citizens of Nevada, and that is what's going to be important. Because unless we begin to tackle these issues, facing the challenges that we're facing, we are not going to succeed here at home. We're not going to succeed as a nation. People can make a difference because your voice represented in Washington is what will make that difference. I'm honored to be here. 26 years in the Navy. I came home to Nevada. I'm working very hard to get my name up and known, and working very hard to earn your trust, your support, and your vote. Thank you.
Hold your applause, please. And our next speaker, Nancy Price.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm so happy to see so many people here, and I'm happy to be here, and I want to thank our hosts for providing this opportunity for us, and an opportunity for you, too, to find out who we are and what we stand for and what you can expect from us. Now, I was the elected Democratic nominee last year, and I don't know if anyone here was at the Pahrump Candidates Night. I was there just last year, and I was there with my daughter. Tonight I'm here with my husband in the back there, former Assemblyman Bob Price. Now, Bob Price served in the Assembly with Mark Amodei, and so I've known Mark for a very long time, and I can tell you he's a nice guy. Well, the thing about a debate or a format like this, instead of just speaking to you, is that you find out different things about not only people, but about the party they represent. Well, I was recently in a debate with some of the lesser-known candidates, and it was remarkable. There were Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Tea Party. Most of us agreed on most things most of the time. Now, you'd find that hard to believe if you just listen to television or some other radio shows. But I can tell you that when the corporate interests, and I'm talking about top 2-4%, the very rich, are not involved, we all have a lot in common, and I'm hoping that tonight we'll see that we have a lot in common.
Before we take a break, I have a message for all three of you from our seniors. They say Nevada's senior community is Nevada's greatest resource. Represent us seniors. Work hard, be honest, or we as seniors will throw you out. And before we get started with the questions that the candidates have not seen, so they are not all pre-prepared, they have not seen them. We are going to take a short commercial break. Please stay with us. The debate begins next, and we will be right back. And now for you, let me
CD2 Special Election Candidate Debate hosted by Trump and Western Representation.
Here are just a few reasons why patients choose Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, MD, the doctor's choice for dermatology in the Pahrump Valley.
I demand, just like you, to see a real board-certified dermatologist. My board-certified dermatologist is a nationally recognized leader, who I'm proud to say is the co-founder of the Youthology Research Institute. Dr. Gunter is seen across the country on national TV.
Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, MD, the board-certified dermatologist for me.
Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, name you can trust in the Pahrump Valley. To schedule your next appointment, just call 727-9600.
Are you hungry? We've got food.
And lots of it.
Wolfie's Restaurant is famous for their food and great racing atmosphere. So if you're looking for the best barbecue ribs, beef barbecue, pulled pork sandwiches with homemade chips, pizza, wings, chicken strips, and so much more.
Come to Wolfie's!
537-1111.
Precious Care Home Health Services offer high-quality home care by highly trained professional caregivers. Precious Care provides gentle, loving, and compassionate non-medical care to seniors, the elderly, or anyone in need. Life is precious at any age, at any stage, and Precious Care is here 24/7 to take your call and address your concerns. If you or a loved one need non-medical in-home assistance, call Precious Care Home Health Services today at 775-727-2084. Again, that number is 775-727-2084.
Pete's Auto Clinic. Tune-ups to overhauls, we do it all. 190 South Humahuaca Street. Call Pete's, 775-727-5DOC. That's 775-727-5362. Check us out online at petesautoclinic.com. CD2 Special Election Candidate Debate hosted by Trump and Western Representation.
about 3 minutes worth. We're ahead of time.
Well, here's the verse to this song.
We're ahead of time because we are not using our full 2 minutes. Which I plan to continue to do.
Me too. Slow boat to China, all to myself alone. Get you and keep you in my arms evermore. Leave all your worries, weep on a faraway shore. Go down on the briny with the moon big and shiny, while I'm melting your heart of stone, made of stone. And to get you on a slow boat to China, all to myself alone. On the briny with the pretty moon big and shiny, while I'm melting your cold, cold heart of stone, made of stone. Now
And welcome back. And now the debate begins with the questions you submitted to the candidates that they have not seen. We're going to see if they can think on their feet. And this is the order that each question will be answered. Nancy, Mark, and then Kirk. All right? We'll start with number one. You each get 2 minutes to respond. So Nancy, first in line, here we go. Would you promote legislation to tax businesses that take jobs out of the country and provide incentives to those that create jobs at home? And how do you propose to fix the mess that NAFTA has created for American labor? And this question was submitted by David.
Well, I couldn't have written a better one myself. Thank you for that question, David. Years ago, I was a Republican. I was raised Republican, and I switched parties when we had a public policy on torture. But I call myself an Eisenhower Republican because when Eisenhower was in office, we had a 91% tax rate on the top earners in this country. Now, I'm not proposing a 91% tax rate, but the reason we did, because we were paying for the war. We weren't borrowing money from overseas, although we probably did for other things, but we paid our way in those days. And what has happened in this period of time is there have been no incentives for business to do anything other than what they're doing. And I'm talking about big businesses here. There is no incentive, as there should be. You get a tax break when you provide jobs in this country. You get a tax break if you invest in renewable energy. You get a tax break for the things that we need in this country. Right now, they're holding on to trillions of dollars, and they can do it because there's no real incentive for them to do anything else. They can invest that money with no risk, and we have to get back to giving tax breaks with a leash on them, saying those jobs stay in this country.
And Mark, now it's your turn.
Thank you. Nice question, David. You've touched on 3 or 4 areas. First or foremost, before you look to the NAFTA issue or the World Trade Organization, you have to take a look at what we're doing to our corporate residents here in the U.S. When you talk about one of the most confiscatory corporate tax rates now in the world, before you tune your eyes to what's going on elsewhere, you have to, I think, look at home first. If you want jobs in America, you need to make this a welcoming place for corporations to do business, to manufacture items, and to employ people. So first and foremost, you need to take a look at what we're doing to our folks here, and then level that playing field. Part of the reason that jobs are going overseas is because it is a more hospitable place for businesses to be. That needs to change, and that's something that this present administration has turned its back on. Second of all, when you talk about the World Trade Organization, the World Trade Organization is not enforcing the rules that were provided for in terms of world trade. So you've got to insist that they do that, because right now many of our competitors are breaking the rules, paying absolutely no attention, and the World Trade Organization is doing nothing about it. So when we talk about a global approach to the global economy and our competitiveness, first and foremost, make America stand on its own in terms of its corporate policies. Second, to the extent that you're going to be part of a World Trade Organization, insist that they treat everybody fairly, which they're not doing right now. Congress has a role in that, in its oversight capacity, to say if you're not going to do it, then we're pulling out. And we should, if we can't get a level playing field for those folks. And then finally, the direct answer to the question is absolutely. If people have a choice of putting jobs overseas or here, I'm all in favor of rewarding those folks who create those jobs in America that pay a living wage for the communities those people work in.
Kirk, it's now your turn.
When you take a look at it, the United States used to be the leading nation for manufacturing in the world, and that has slowly disappeared over the last 20 years. There are a number of reasons that you can attribute to that, but it really comes down to the structure that we have laid, the onerous tax code, the corporate income tax that we have today. All those things were designed to where business was given other opportunities overseas. The playing field was not level. And it wasn't that they couldn't compete here. They could compete better by going overseas, making inexpensive goods, bringing them back here, and enticing us to buy them at cheaper than what they do here. I think every single one of us as Americans today would much rather have the products made here. We'd probably even be willing to pay a little bit more. And the reason why is because we know that when we buy things here that are made here, it is supporting our jobs, our neighbors, our communities, because not only are the manufacturing dollars stayed here, but also those tax dollars stay within our communities. The tax code needs to be reformed in order to allow us to reduce the number of deductions, exemptions that are made throughout it that will allow us to bring money into the government coffers and then lower the overall corporate tax rate. Because when you lower the overall corporate tax rate, that is what is going to bring businesses back here. When you start doing that, the playing field within the World Trade Organization and in trade pacts like the North American Free Trade Agreement are going to resolve themselves, because America is going to become competitive. We are going to become the nation again that is going to be leading the world, but it's creating those conditions where businesses come here to support America, and we support them by coming back here through tax reform, through buying their products, and allowing the jobs to stay here in the United States.
Question number 2. And Nancy, you're first to answer. What is your position on the Patriot Act as it currently stands? Are we safer with it in force or not? And should there be any provisions or changes to its present state? And that was submitted by Dr. Searles.
Well, I support the Constitution, of course, and I find that the Patriot Act to be unconstitutional. There's an invasion in our privacy. I don't know if you've seen recently where the FBI can now go into your garbage without any reason for suspecting you. It's a catastrophe. Our safety is going to depend on a lot of things, but not the Patriot Act. There are other things that we can do to assure information is gotten in a correct way. So I didn't support the Patriot Act when it passed. I don't support it now.
And Mark, now it's your turn.
Thank you. The answer to Dr. Cyril's, if I fall from view here, it's all part of the program, don't worry about that. The answer to Dr. Cyril's question is I do not support it the way it presently exists. I think the Constitution takes precedence over what has been written in the Patriot Act. That doesn't mean that you can't have national security. I think it can coexist side by side with the constitutional protections that we all expect and enjoy in the Bill of Rights and elsewhere in the Constitution. If there are national security issues that require timeliness, a short fuse for time to make decisions on warrants or access or phone taps or searching other areas, if there is a speedier process that needs to be entailed, which still involves the due process rights, probable cause, those sorts of things, then fine, let's create that. But it is a strong system that we have been working under that is not broke and doesn't need to be fixed in the name of the Patriot Act to basically cause us to have to check our constitutional rights at the door in the name of national security. So, what would you do if you had to make some changes? The changes would be this. If there are areas that are demonstrated where you need a more timely probable cause determination by those authorities, then fine. Set up those structures which allow you to get that in a more timely fashion. National security is phenomenally important, but not to extinguish constitutional rights.
And Kirk, it's now your turn.
The Patriot Act was the largest expansion and intrusion into our lives that the United States has ever experienced. It was done in reaction to the attacks on 9/11. The blunt reality is, I have sat back in the Pentagon and seen where portions of that act saved lives by allowing the walls between the intelligence services, both domestically and internationally, to come down to allow an unprecedented degree of cooperation. There are a number of areas that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the CIA, and other agencies now use in a cooperative effort to be able to thwart, deter, and defend us against terrorist attacks from around the world. That said, the Patriot Act itself must undergo a complete review. We cannot just look at it and say, well, let's take it page by page. We need to figure out in each one of those by line, show me. Tell me what that line was written in for, what is the metric where it can be demonstrated that it has made us more secure, tell us how it contributes to our national safety, give us proof where we can do that and follow it through, and if they cannot demonstrate it, then guess what? It gets eliminated and we get our constitutional rights back. The Constitution is the foundation upon which this country was founded, and it must be adhered to. It cannot be compromised or sacrificed for the sake of expediency or because we have a reaction to an immediate need. While it is important, the Patriot Act itself must be reviewed. They quickly pushed it through this last time. We watched it, and it was amazing to see how the Democrats went from opposing it to suddenly wanting to rush it through and get it done. We can no longer afford to do that, and we must go back, begin to review it, and gain our rights back as citizens, because not every provision is necessary today.
And back to Nancy. Do you believe we must make changes to the Social Security and Medicaid systems to keep them viable? If so, what do you envision to keep the system in place? This was submitted by Betty.
Well, thank you, Betty, if you're out there. The kind of things that are being talked about in terms of Medicare and Social Security, I think are an affront to the American way. I happen to be on Social Security. I happen to have Medicare along with TRICARE from, I'm retired military. It's a wonderful system. And there are things that we can do to ensure its survival. And I think we can do that once we do some of these other things about the tax code we're talking about. But one thing, for example, with Social Security would be to raise the cap. I can tell you with Medicare, there's plenty we can do. My husband back there has an insulin pump. Costs $3,500 for this insulin pump. I have an old version of an iPhone that'll do 1,000 times more than this insulin pump, and it costs $50 today. I was in an accident not too long ago, right after I filed. I was in the emergency room for 4 hours. The bill was in excess of $34,000 for the 4 hours. There's a lot we can do with Medicare and Social Security, but to do away with something that makes America America, I think is a wrong direction to go.
And Mark, it's your turn.
Thanks, Karen. First of all, there's a phenomenal credibility gap on the issue. I think first and foremost, when you talk about both of these issues, you need to start by telling the truth.
Yes.
And the truth of the matter is this: if you continue to do nothing and you don't reform the system, then they're both going to crash. And I don't care whether you're on it or you're not on it or you're planning on being on it. If you don't maintain it, doing nothing right now and letting the system crash will serve nobody. So let's be honest first and foremost and say there must be changes. Let's skip the wheelchair ads going over the cliff and all that other stuff and say this. First and foremost, you have to take a look at people who are not drawing. If you're already in the system and you have a vested right to your benefits, then nobody, I don't think, is going to want to say, let's change it for those people. You need to take a look at actuarial reality and say, if you're going to be in 10 years, guess what? Maybe we're going to move that 10 years back to 12 years. Maybe we're going to move it back to 15 years for your eligibility. But we're not going to spring it on you. We're going to give you a chance to plan for that. And you go all the way back down the line to those younger Americans and say, by the time you get there, the eligibility age is going to be this, and the benefits are going to be this. And they need to be founded on principles that are sustainable, so when they plan on that, like the people that are already drawing, it will be there and part of their plans which they're entitled to rely upon. That discussion is phenomenally missing right now, with everybody trying to out-sensationalize the other in terms of we're going to throw seniors out, although I think the seniors, you said, were going to throw us out if we didn't pay attention. So we're paying attention. And with that, I would say this: you need to start somewhere. And the only plan out there right now that is a starting place, please nobody leave the room without hearing these words, that is a starting place for the discussions, is Congressman Paul Ryan's plan. And you know why that's the starting place? Because it's the only plan that's been proposed. Thank you.
And Kirk, it's your turn.
When you take a look at those programs and what they do, there is no future for them given the current fiscal environment. Estimates today are that with those programs, we are between $60 and $100 trillion with a T in unfunded obligations. They can no longer serve as funds that the government can use to touch. So first and foremost, you stop the government from going in and raiding any of those for any future unfunded programs whatsoever. For the people that are currently in the program, we don't want to see them cut off, it changed, or done anything, because they have paid into those programs. They have an expectation of what is there. The future, however, is not sustainable. It is going to require some very difficult, very truthful, very factual decisions by those that we elect and send back to Congress to sit down in rooms and honestly address the problem. Scare tactics are unacceptable on either side of the fence. It is not grandma under the bus or the grandchildren over the cliff, just like Mark said. The reality of it is we are going to have those hard discussions, because if we don't, we as a nation are failing ourselves, because it is our programs that we put into place as Americans because we believe in ourselves. We believe in taking care of some of the most vulnerable members of our society, of providing ourselves with a safety net. But unless we start looking forward on those and having transparency within the system so that Americans can understand what they're going to contribute, when they're going to contribute, and what they're going to get out of the system will not work. And right now, I don't feel Congress has been transparent with the American people in any of those programs. Otherwise, why would those unfunded obligations exist? Why would those programs be allowed? And we are going to need to look at them in toto.
And back to Nancy.
Sometimes being first isn't the best thing.
Was a draw of the cards.
I know.
The bailout failed. The stimulus did not work. Unemployment continues to grow, and the housing market has lost extreme value. What do you think will turn this mess around? And that was submitted by Deborah.
Well, Deborah, I agree with some of what you said, but not all. I think this stimulus package helped a worse catastrophe. And I used the example of driving around this CD district last year and putting 8,000 miles on my car, most of it encountering roads being fixed and a lot of people working that wouldn't have been working under other circumstances. But in terms of the catastrophe that we are in, this is not a normal dip in the economy. This was a contrived fraud on the entire world, not just here at home. I'm underwater in my house, and I didn't get a subprime mortgage, but I did get an assessment or property amount on my house that was unreal under the circumstances. And the reason it was is because the banks were paying people. They were paying people to up the amount of the loan. The banks I thought in the old days, you know, the bank held some portion of this loan, but they don't. And they sold them off, rated them AAA and sold them around the world. This is not a normal dip in the economy. And what we need to do is recognize that and deal with it. First and foremost, prosecute the people who did this to us and the rest of the world. And it'll set an example so those kinds of things will not happen again. But the first and most important thing is put back the Glass-Steagall Act.
And Mark, it's your turn.
Thanks, Karen. You know what, you have to start out with the recognition that it is the private sector that pays for the public sector. So when you talk about bailout, stimulus, unemployment, and housing, you're talking the first two things about what the government does, and the last two things are what you need for the private sector to rebound with. And so when you talk about bailout and stimulus, and you talk about approximately $4 trillion that's been expended, and where we are here in Nevada and where we are here in the country, and knowing that those two things require tax dollars to accomplish, and they require tax dollars at a time when the private sector is sick, financially speaking, and that's put gently. So it's a cultural issue first and foremost, and that is you have to promote the private sector for that health. You have to create jobs. Jobs will produce people that will buy houses, can afford houses. That will produce a housing market where people aren't underwater again. So you have to have a cultural divide first and foremost and say, what do we do in the private sector? And I would submit to you that what you don't do in the private sector, in the situation that this country and this state is in right now, is generate programs that require trillions of dollars of more federal money to fund. Because government jobs have to be paid for by the private sector. You must create private sector jobs first. So, when you talk about what is the solution is not tax increases. The solution is not more debt. The solution is not more regulation. The solution is not more restrictive land use policies in a state and in a county which the vast supermajority of all the acres are federally owned. You have to let the private sector go and allow those entrepreneurial things. And we had talked for just a minute about corporations. When you look at the statistics, it's the smaller business entities that generate those jobs. So you have to get down to that level and say, how do we encourage those people to come back? Because they're the ones who are hiring in Pahrump. They're the ones who are hiring in Tonopah. They're the ones who are hiring up and down the state. So that's where the focus ought to be from the federal level.
And Kirk, it's now your turn.
When you look at what the stimulus attempted to do and the trillions of dollars that we poured into it, it essentially turned into a bank bailout. It did not turn into what was going to actually move the economy, stimulate the economy, and get the jobs out there. Here we are right now with an administration, with a president who says he's not concerned that there might be a double dip in the recession. That's an unacceptable compromise to the folks out here in Nevada who are suffering anywhere from 12 to 20% unemployment. We can't afford it here at home. This state is hurting and continues to hurt, and we are going to have to do what's necessary. But it is going to be the private sector that does it. We as a nation can no longer afford to say a corporation, a company, or an entity is too big to fail. Too big to fail is an excuse for doing nothing. Too big to fail is an excuse for spending your hard-earned tax dollars to help out a corporation who was irresponsible in how they organized and spent money to operate. We can no longer afford to do that. And if they fail, guess what? That doesn't mean they shut the doors and everyone's put out of work. That means they're given an opportunity to reorganize under bankruptcy laws, keep people employed, restructure how they do business so that they can continue to provide those jobs that allow people to stay employed, to afford their homes, to contribute to the tax base so that that private sector can continue to grow, so that it can fund that public sector as it needs to provide. But the reality of it is the public sector must become smaller. Less government is better government. And in the private sector, they are more than capable of running what's necessary where the government today feels an obligation and a right to intrude where we do not need it.
And now we have to take a short commercial break, and we're going to be right back with more of your questions for our candidates.
CD2 Special Election Candidate Debate hosted by Trump and Western Representation.
Here's why all of Pahrump is singing the praises of their king of construction, the boss of building, the master of plaster, and maven of paving, Renee Morales of Morales Construction.
In Pahrump and Nye County for residential and commercial, for me and for you, call Morales Construction for your construction needs at 751-2009. That's 751-2009. And say, hey, Renee, and for sure, he'll make your day.
Lip Sense, liquid lip color that lasts 4 to 18 hours. Will not bleed, smear, or kiss off. No more lipstick on your teeth or on your coffee cup. Best of all, Lip Sense will not dry your lips like the store-bought brands. Order today. Go to www.liquidmakeup.com or call toll-free 866-224-5477.
Are you hungry? We've got food.
And lots of it.
Wolfie's Restaurant is famous for their food and great racing atmosphere. So if you're looking for the best barbecue ribs, beef barbecue, pulled pork sandwiches with homemade chips, pizza, wings, chicken strips, and so much more.
Come to Wolfie's!
537-1111.
Beats Auto Clinic. Tune-ups to overhauls, we do it all. 190 South Humahuaca Street. Call Pete's, 775-727-5DOC. That's 775-727-5362. Check us out online at petesautoclinic.com. CD2 Special Election Candidate Debate hosted by Trump and Western Representation.
You don't know the answer, you can have to. Fluff. Bottom line up front.
Fake it till you make it, is that the one?
Oh, let me tell you.
We are back. I told you it wouldn't take too long. And we're going to continue on with the questions that you have submitted for the candidates. They have not seen them, so we're seeing how well they think on their feet. All right? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I know. Nancy's first, and she's ready. Please give the audience your best stump speech on why the people should elect you to the U.S. Congress to represent the great state of Nevada. And that was submitted by the Trunk Chicks.
Well, I don't really have a stump speech, but let me tell you why I think I'm the best candidate. Back there, you'll have a brief overview of my background. I think in terms of my education, my experience, I have the most breadth and depth. Probably because I'm the oldest, but still in all, I have the best breadth and depth. Education-wise, My degrees include public policy, public administration, and journalism. So I know what to look for in those areas. I was an elected regent for 6 years. I know the politics of education and how tough that can be. I was in the military for 24 years. I retired as Chief Master Sergeant, and I could not be an officer because I was 34 when I joined. So I went to basic training with the 17 and 18-year-olds. So I know how to handle kids too. There's a number of things. I don't know here if this is good, but I'm married to Bob Price, I mentioned earlier, who was in the legislature for 28 years. And I like to say if Hillary Clinton can get credit for being First Lady, I ought to get credit for hanging around the legislature and understanding the politics. And I think that's the biggest thing that I offer. I understand the politics. I understand it. I don't play the game, but I understand it. And you have to be able to maneuver that. So for those reasons and a couple of others, I do think I'm the best candidate. It's not a career move for me. This is a mission.
And Mark?
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Trunk Chicks. I am not married to Bob Price. But I like him.
Oh, good.
Listen, you know what? I think what a lot of this boils down to is who do you think is the best qualified? Everybody comes from different areas and everybody has strengths in their background and things like that. I think my strengths and some of the things that drew me into this opportunity are this. I have lived Congressional District 2, born and raised here. Now that wasn't a choice, that was just something that happened. But when you grow up here, you are a product of public schools here, you raise your children here, you serve publicly here, you serve in the private sector, which is how I earned my living for the past 24 years in the private sector in this congressional district. You have served for 14 years in elective office, which is a part-time thing. I know some people are talking about career politicians and status quo. Please don't leave the room and think that anybody who's served in the Nevada legislature for approximately $10,000 a year is a career politician. You have to go earn your own living separate from that. But when you talk about working your issues, whether it's water on the man's fan here in Pahrump, whether it's transportation issues, whether it's the nuclear issue, whether it's anything that has to do with realizing that the people who elected you are the boss, and when you've done a good enough job to where they've reelected you, to where you got to say that you retired based on term limits, not that you were thrown out, and when you were elected by large majorities of the voters, that's the ultimate report card. And so I would hope that when you look at those backgrounds and you say depth in your communities, depth in your issues, 14 years of public service, no ethics, no trips to the Ethics Commission. I think those are strong things for somebody who gets it when they go back there, and also somebody who has stood and fought on issues that are important on taxes, on spending, and on states' rights, that's something where you can say, you know what, maybe this guy can go back there and he can start on the 15th. Thank you.
Kirk, before you speak, we're going to have a little bit of extra time after the final question here, and Jerry is going to ask you in the audience if you have any questions, so you'll be able to do that live with us, so you can kind of think of a question or two that you might want to present. All right, last submitted question. Go for it, Kirk.
Thank you. Today, when you look, I grew up in Nevada. Attended Carson High, went off to the Naval Academy, 4 years there, thought I wanted to come home after 5 years. Fate and destiny would take me in a new direction. The reality of it is, while people may have a lot of experiences, I stand back and say the things that I experienced across a 26-year career around the world gave me the necessary breadth and depth in life experiences to be able to go back to Washington and understand how it works. When you want to talk about politics and how the legislative process works, if anyone thinks that sitting in the Pentagon and watching it from both the civilian side and the military side, what goes into making the laws necessary to defend a country, against attack and against the future that we may not even know what holds for us. I have seen what is necessary and what is required. Integrity, that is what is going to be required of whoever goes back to serve in Washington. I have that rock solid integrity. I had it when lives were at stake, and I will maintain that same standard when I am back here in Nevada representing you as a congressman back in Washington. I live, breathe, and will represent you ethically, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We are in this unfortunate circumstance because of ethical issues. There is no difference between a personal and professional life when I represent you, because I want your children to look up to me as your congressman and say, that's someone to be proud of. That's someone to look up to. That's a standard I want you to uphold. It is going to be those experiences that set the bar that I believe I can go back to Washington, hit the ground running from day one, represent what is best for you, fight for your needs, because I know what it means to stand in the heat of Washington, take on a president, take on an administration, and make you proud of what we need to do to make Nevada our great state again.
And back to Nancy. Are you ready?
I am.
Here we go. Every time I hear a politician say, we need to secure our borders, I yawn and tune out. We have been given the same answers for years and years, yet nothing changes and our borders are not secure. What is your solution to actually securing our borders? And that was submitted by Bob.
Well, thanks, Bob. Certainly, immigration is a very contentious issue, and I will say that I've been around a long time, and this issue comes up periodically, and nothing changes. We have an immigration law that is archaic. It doesn't suit our needs, and I think it's not intended to do anything. The reason is that if we have a porous border, we have cheap labor. If we have a porous border, we have guns and drugs going back and forth, big business. It is intended to be that way. Now, if I were an Al-Qaeda terrorist, I'd come in through Canada. I would not come in through Mexico. So we need to have, and I won't use the word comprehensive because it means something else. We must change our immigration law, and we must do that immediately. Now, what we're concerned with are people coming up from Mexico, from wherever, but up from Mexico. Well, there's three groups of people. There are criminals. There are people who just want to come and work. They don't want to stay here. They don't want citizenship. They want to work and then go back to their families. And then there's the group that do want to become citizens. And we need to look at each of those groups separately. We need to recognize that the security of the border depends on making that movement across the border one that's beneficial and one that's secure from the criminal element.
Mark?
Karen?
Your turn.
Thank you. You know what? Nice job, Bob, because you didn't say, you just said, I've heard secure the border. What is your idea for securing the border? Three elements. You have a technology element, you have a personnel element, and you have a capital improvements element. And you can't just concentrate on Texas to San Diego. I mean, that's obviously the most focusable place, but you also have to talk about coastlines, and as Nancy said, you also have that thing up there in the north called the Canadian border. But first and foremost, you need to concentrate on employing those three areas of assets that are available to you from Texas to San Diego. And then you move on to the waterborne issues. And once again, it's technology, it's personnel, and it's capital improvements. So when you hear these platitudes about we need to secure the borders, you have to say, What's the plan for employing the assets available to you to accomplishing that mission? Those are the assets available. If there are other ones, fine, bring them forward. But how do you apply them in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California for starters to do that? So it's ask the right question as opposed to the platitudes that don't talk about anything else. It is a physical security issue about controlling specific acreage and waterfront, and it ought to be approached in that role, first and foremost.
And Kirk, it's your turn.
While Nancy wouldn't touch on the issue saying comprehensive, I will tell you that we as Americans have taken very complex, difficult, and thorny issues and have addressed them in a comprehensive manner. We did it in the Clinton administration addressing welfare reform, and millions came across the roll. There is no reason why we can't address the issue with border security and illegal immigration in the same way. That's not an excuse and should never be used as an excuse for addressing a fundamental problem that we are having in our nation. When you cannot secure the borders, you're allowing people in that are immediately breaking the law and shouldn't be in that position to begin with. The borders themselves is not just a south of the border problem by them coming up here. It is also an issue in what are they coming here for? Why are we allowing them in, and what is drawing them here to be here? We need to look ourselves in the eye as Americans and find out, are we giving our businesses and corporations the tools that they need and have necessary? I think we a little tilt and we got it here. The tools that they need and are necessary in order to make sure that they are hiring people that are here legally. Because once they have those tools, some of the problem with border security is going to begin to resolve itself. When you look at why people are coming here, they're coming here to earn money, and what happens to that money? It leaves our country, goes south, whether it is to Mexico, Central or South America. That's billions of dollars that are not being circulated within our community. If you eliminate the root cause, which is why people are coming here to earn a living, the border security issues are going to begin to resolve themselves, but you have to give people, those corporations, the technology to be able to tell. Then you need to look at the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which fundamentally has to be reformed. Having personally interacted with them, trying to get one of my sailors through the naturalization process, the system does not work. It is hostile, it is against people, and we need to look at it and make it a more welcoming environment, because we are the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and we should welcome people here that continue to keep us that way.
Ms. First?
Yes.
What do you think we should do about organized labor in government jobs when the pensions and benefit packages they advocate and negotiate are bankrupting our states? And do you believe prevailing wage on government jobs needs to be changed? And that was submitted by Eddie.
Well, Eddie, I support unions and I support labor, and I would want good jobs, good paying jobs, and good benefits for everybody. And the way we do that is through negotiation. You know, there's two sides when people negotiate something. There's not just one side. And if it is just one side, then you deal with that problem. But when you have people working and people with good jobs, the economy gets better. That's what we want for our country. Now, there isn't any entity that isn't without fault. So yes, you can find fault with unions, but not with the idea of unions. And I think that that this attack on working people, whether they're union or not union, is not a good system. And what we're looking at is a global economy, and we don't want to be on the bottom rung of that global economy. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is through good negotiations and contracts. And in terms of the second part was...
and do you believe prevailing wage on government jobs needs to be changed?
No.
All right. Mark?
Hi, Karen. You know what? The issue on organized labor in government jobs has been profiled by what's happened recently in Wisconsin and in Ohio. We don't have unionized labor at the state level in Nevada as far as most of our employees. Our teachers union is organized, which has a phenomenal impact on the state general fund through the distributive school account, and we have labor organizations at the local county levels through Chapter 288 in the Dodge Act, which was passed long before I think even Bob Price was in the legislature. But let me say this, the issue is one of financial responsibility, and what we've experienced in the last few years is those folks who have unionized and have contracts, and then we're faced with employers who had 40%, as in the case of Nevada, shortfalls in general fund revenues, and the teachers union in this state insisted, we want you to ignore the fiscal realities. We want you to ignore a 40% fall in general fund revenues, and we want to continue on with our pay and benefits despite what's happening to everybody else in the state. And that's wrong, and we should not have that. And those people should be as answerable as anybody else to the fiscal realities. And so, I have, in the past, supported talking about workplace safety and talking about fairness in disciplinary procedures. But some people said, well, you support, no, never wages and benefits, because the federal government is paid for by the private sector, and that should not be the case. And we need only look at what has happened in this last cycle in Nevada and in those other states to know that if you're not going to be a part of the team in good times and bad, then you know what, you shouldn't have special rights. As far as prevailing wage, I will tell you this, I think it needs to be revisited because it shouldn't cost more for the government to do physical or capital improvements than it does the private sector. It makes no sense. It's a heck of a political plum for somebody to say they have, but it makes no sense.
And Kirk, it's your turn.
This entire issue can be summed up in one word: accountability. It is the accountability of government to make sure that they are properly spending the taxpayers' dollars when they hire the best and most qualified people possible to be able to exercise what we see as government programs that benefit the public sector. When you look at it, it is my opinion that unions do not belong within that process. The reality is government has the ability with its employees to ensure that they are taken care of and have the wages, benefits, they provide the services necessary. When it comes to the pay issue, it is not a problem of pay that needs to be revisited. It is the issue of accountability, in that when I sat back in Washington and I watched some of the most dedicated workers we have in government in federal service, they will do an unbelievable amount of work for this nation across every single segment of government. But the reality of it is there's deadwood that they cannot hold accountable, that they cannot properly document, and that they cannot make go away. That's what has to happen. There has to be accountability, and accountability goes on the other side. It is up to those employees working for the government to make sure that they are looking up to those that employ them within the government, those senior civilian officials that are there, and say, this is where you need to be taking care of us. This is what we need for what we're doing, so that you have compensation that is equivalent to what the public sector does, or excuse me, the private sector does within the public sector. So again, it is accountability in how the public sector workers frame their needs to the government, and the government is responsible. That's what you have those political appointees there to negotiate and do. By the same token, they need to have the flexibility to hold employees that do not perform accountable, and make sure that if we need to, they're not employed. I want only the best in our government, because that's what our government is supposed to represent. You want a smaller, more efficient government, you want the best people possible serving.
And it looks like we have time for maybe one or two questions, Jerry, if you'd like to ask the audience.
Okay, great. Does someone have a question? Okay, right here.
Yes, I'd like to know from all three of you, what do you feel about our education system, and what are you doing now, not if you get in office or when you get in office in Washington, D.C. What do you think about this system and what's going on, and as far as our children being indoctrinated, and what do you plan to do about it, and what are you doing about it now?
I think I'm first. Earlier I said the politics of education is pretty tough, and it is. I was a regent for 6 years, and as much as I love the universities, I love the community colleges. There's plenty of places to look there to have them fit into the country the way it is today, and fit into our homes, and fit into this new economy. I was surprised that we hadn't had a question on renewable energy, and I want to say that I did a interview with NPR, and they said, well, why don't you just ignore the rural counties? You know, there's not many votes there, just ignore them. And I told them, rural counties are the future of Nevada, and the concept of renewable energy coming here will include all of education. When you talk about K through 12, I think I've learned my first at least 2 years of college when I went K through 12. We need to beef up what we teach our kids, and we need that because we need a new mentality to take on the intricacies of renewable energy. You need engineers out there, and you need water out there, and you need people who will negotiate contracts and keep the water in the rural counties. It's going to be the future of Nevada.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, thanks. What are you doing now? What have you done? Not what would you do? Let me just give you a little bit of my personal history. 2009, voted against the distributive school funding account in the Nevada legislature. That doesn't happen very often. A lot of people are like, my God, you can't vote against K-12. I'll tell you why. Because in 2009, we had to have a special session of the legislature to fix our accountability statutes just for Nevada to be able to apply for the Race to the Top funding. Just to be able to apply. Now the message there with that is our accountability standards were so deficient that we didn't even meet the Harry Berry criteria to apply for Race to the Top. That is a phenomenal shortfall on the part of our policymakers in this state. The answer, I believe, is power down. You put the money, you put the power, you put everything down to the school districts and to the actual school level. You might want to set some standards to say this is what we want you to achieve, but how you do it is up to you, because that then invests those districts and those school boards and those people on the site, those administrators and those people in the classroom with the control, as opposed to what we have now, which is very little control, which gets you into more time to do the indoctrination stuff that you talked about. I firmly believe the answer is you set the standards and then you leave those folks alone. And if they don't meet them, then you go talk to them, but you give them ownership in their school district, you give them ownership in their schools, and you give them ownership in their classrooms. But I think you have to be willing, first and foremost, to not say that money is the answer to every question. And by the way, this state has been very generous with K through 12 education over the years, despite what you hear from a lot of folks. No offense, I know there's no media here. A lot of folks in the media and a lot of folks that are lobbying for a side. It's time to get the politics of compensation and benefits out and the politics of performance into education, and I believe that's power down.
Kirk, your turn.
Right now, when you look at the education system, in many ways it's failing. That's why you look at major industry and they say there isn't the future, we aren't going to have the innovation. That's why you have the number of parents that are taking their kids and homeschooling them. The reality is, I came from a family where my mother was a high school English teacher, and she taught both ends of the spectrum, from honor students all the way to those who were troubled kids that had to stay after school and were disciplinary issues. She saw the full thing. She does not believe, nor do I, that teacher tenure is going to be a solution. It has to be a performance-based system. We need to make sure that we in the education system can hold them accountable. While it might be very easy to say political, oh, eliminate the Department of Education, that's nice to say as a goal. The reality of it isn't going to happen. Going back to Washington, though, you can begin to work to take chunks of that department, begin to get the money reprogrammed away from the federal government, down to the state level, where the states can decide what is best and what is necessary to educate our children here at home. When you begin to get it to the state level and it comes from the state down into the communities, guess what happens? Parents begin to take greater ownership because they are now engaged and involved with the future of their children in how they're being educated. You do not end up with exactly what you spoke to, which is that indoctrination. What you end up with is a community involved and engaged at every level in the education, K through 12 and beyond. There are a lot of things that we can do here. The first is going to be, don't let the federal government run our education, make the state perform for us and get it back down to our level. And you do that at the federal level. As Congress, we hold the purse strings. You begin to work to reprogram the money to come back to the states where you don't have a bureaucracy driving it, but you have the people here in Nevada making it happen, from the teachers to the parents and everyone else.
And now it's time we need to take another short commercial break. When we get back, it'll be time for the lightning round. So please stay with us.
CD2 Special Election Candidate Debate hosted by Trump and Western Representation.
Here are just a few reasons why patients choose Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, MD, the doctor's choice for dermatology in the Pahrump Valley.
I demand, just like you, to see a real board-certified dermatologist. My board-certified dermatologist is a nationally recognized leader, who I'm proud to say is the co-founder of the Youthology Research Institute. Dr. Gunter is seen across the country on national TV.
Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, MD, the board-certified dermatologist for me.
Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, name you can trust in the Pahrump Valley. To schedule your next appointment, just call 727-9600.
Precious Care Home Health Services offer high-quality home care by highly trained professional caregivers. Precious Care provides gentle, loving, and compassionate non-medical care to seniors, the elderly, or anyone in need. Life is precious at any age, at any stage, and Precious Care is here 24/7 to take your call and address your concerns. If you or a loved one need non-medical in-home assistance, call Precious Care Home Health Services today at 775-727-2084. Again, that number is 775-727-2084.
Decades ago, we set out to bring affordable, reliable electricity to everyone. Lines extended. Lives improved. America grew. Today, we have a new challenge: to use that electricity wisely.
CD2 Special Election Candidate Debate hosted by Trump and Western Representation.
And we're back. We have a question from a member of the audience. Would you like to stand up and ask the question?
I have provided the three of you with a copy of Time magazine. And that is this week's issue, where there's a picture of the United States Constitution being shredded, and the question is, does it matter? I think that is an outrageous question, but then that's me. So I'm asking you, since President Obama came into office, Newsweek magazine saw fit to run a cover page that said we're all socialists now. We now have Time magazine asking if we should shred our Constitution. And I am wondering, should we the people be really afraid, because this is scary to me? Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy?
In 1979, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I still abide by that oath. I am running because of that oath, because I think we need to go back. You know, one of the things you find in research is that when you go to the primary doctrine, it usually says the right thing first, and then over the years it gets convoluted. So I think we should look at this in terms of that. This is our primary doctrine. It's not perfect, but we've amended it, and I think we need another amendment. One of the problems with our Constitution is we have the Supreme Court that is not always right. They weren't right on eminent domain, for example, and they are not right that the founders of the Constitution had corporations as people. There is, you can go to my website, and there's a link to movetoamend.com that will correct the Supreme Court. And the only way you can do it is through a constitutional amendment to say the founders did not mean for corporations to be people. I think this is a fundamental correction that needs to be made, because all of the things we've talked about tonight can be linked to corporate control through contributions of our government. And we've got to have campaign finance, and we have to change the way we view corporations and contributions.
Mark?
Thanks. This is still the 2-minute thing, or is this the?
You can answer 2 minutes or less.
Okay.
Yes.
I've tried to do some of the less, but thank you for that hint. You know, it's. I guess I'm not surprised that Time wants to know if the Constitution still matters and that they picked that particular graphic. And should we be afraid? You know what? We all come from different backgrounds, and it's kind of dark times when we talk about our state and our nation in terms of some of the stuff and the basis of your question. But I think you have to have a belief that, that there are some tough times, and there have been tough times before, but these are the times that require people who really believe in the foundations of how we got this far along as a nation and a state to go fight for those. And I won't speak for anybody else, but I think that's kind of engendered in this special election that the whole nation will be watching. Those foundations are worth fighting for. And they are worth fighting for because that document, even though it is several hundred plus years old, let's face it, those folks did a really good job. Maybe not perfect, but they did a really good job, a good enough job to where it shouldn't be messed with unless you follow the procedures, which are very hard to duplicate for adding to it. And so, yeah, it does matter. And as someone who not only has served themselves, but who had the privilege of having a child go serve to defend this most recently. And it's like, yeah, it's worth fighting for. And yeah, it does still matter. And yeah, those things like the Second Amendment, and the 10th Amendment, and the Commerce Clause and all those things, they're real. And that's why we need to get into the fight, take this back, and turn that direction. Because we are nowhere near what this document stands for and what's been going on for the last few years. So yeah, get in the fight. You're absolutely right. It's worth fighting for. And we'll get it turned around.
Kirk.
This paper should put a cold pit into everyone's stomach by the fact that the question even needs to be asked of our nation. That said, that also means that we have an obligation as citizens, with it being asked, to answer the call that's there, which is we must become engaged in what our government is doing. We must demand from our elected officials what is necessary to get this country headed back on the right course. We must demand that government stop intruding into our lives to the scope, breadth, and depth that it is today, because that is not government's job. Government's job is to facilitate our lives, not live it for us or direct us how to do it. Does this Constitution still matter? You bet. Like Nancy, I raised my right hand and I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. 17 of my sailors paid the ultimate price to defend that document. Thousands others have given their lives in the last 10 years fighting to keep this nation free and defend our national interests. And many more in our future, unfortunately, will commit to do so and unfortunately lose their lives to do it. It is a document that while occasionally we as a nation choose to adjust it, it should be done carefully, judiciously, and only with great care, and our thoughts not for what is going on in the moment, but the future as well. I believe that this document is living and breathing only with what we choose to give it life to. It is our document. Each and every American owns a piece of it. Does it still matter? You bet. Am I still willing to give my life for it? Absolutely. Each and every one of you know what's required. We will continue to do it. Stay engaged with your government. Look carefully on who you're going to elect to send back to Washington. Why? Because now they will be in a position to directly affect this document. Let's keep it ours.
Please hold your applause. All right, we're going to start the lightning round. Just go from left to right. So it'll make it quicker. I want to get in as many of these as I can.
Left to right and then right to
Yeah,
left.
you're not first this time.
Oh, that's great.
Here we go. And yes or no, or one answer, one word answer. Do you support the complete repeal of Obamacare?
Yes.
No.
Yes. How are we doing?
While we wait for Obamacare to work its way through the courts, will you vote to defend all aspects of the bill? You just work it back this way. Let me read it again.
It's the same.
While we wait for Obamacare to work its way through the courts, will you vote to defund all aspects of the bill?
Defund, I thought you said defend.
I did.
Will I vote to defund? Yes.
No.
Yes.
Do you support or oppose the current administration's policy of trying enemy combatants and terrorists in our federal courts rather than the military tribunals?
No.
Federal courts instead
Do you want me
of
to repeat that?
Yeah, please.
Do you support or oppose the current administration's policy of trying enemy combatants and terrorists in our federal courts rather than military tribunals?
Yes.
No.
All right. This one I've got to get in. Are you for or against Yucca Mountain?
Maybe.
Depends.
For.
All right. Choose one committee in Congress you would like to serve on.
Armed Services.
Ways and Means.
Public lands.
States like Georgia and Indiana have passed laws requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. Would you introduce similar legislation at the federal level?
Yes.
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 All right. Now you're off the hook. As we're concluding, it's time for your closing statements, and I need to limit you to 1 minute.
Well, that'll be easy because when we got this question, that was most of my closing speech. So let me instead, I started out with the question, what kinds of things did we agree on? And from what I heard, I think we agreed on the Patriot Act. I think we agreed on closing tax loopholes. I think we agreed on too big to fail. I know we agreed on the Constitution. So I would hope that we would stop the campaigns that just hate one another. We need to get serious in this country about what needs to be done. We aren't going to agree with everyone, and party label is a real problem. We have to understand the basic things that have to be done and those things that have to be done first. So I implore all of you and all of America to do what Eisenhower said. And Eisenhower said, politics should be everybody's part-time job.
Thanks, Nancy. Thank you folks for coming. I think when you make your choice, you should ask some questions. Will you listen and interact with the people who gave you the job? Have you demonstrated that in your public service over the last 15 years? How have you performed over the last 15 years on the tough fights? Have you engaged in the fights, or have you just kind of hung out? Where were you when they tried to create a state income tax in 2003? Where were you when they tried to increase the funding for the K-12 spending in 2009 in the face of 40% general fund revenue drops? Were you somebody who got along, or were you somebody who went into the fight? And you know what? It's nice when you prevail, but you've also got to stand your ground when you think you're right and you're doing the thing that the people who gave you the job did it. Most recently, when you say, where will you be? Will you stand and fight, or will you go away? I produced an ad that was put out a few days ago that got a lot of people pretty upset. But you know what? The people that were most upset were the ones who didn't want to talk about the issue. Too much debt, too much spending, and unequivocally telling you the truth. If telling you the truth matters, then I hope you'll give me some serious consideration. Thanks.
Kirk?
The choice you are about to make is going to set the tone for what is going to happen in 2012, because it will be leveraged to advantage if this district changes its party. The reality of it is going to take leadership, it is going to take integrity, and it is going to take someone with the breadth and depth of experience necessary to go back to Washington and stand in the middle of an ethical firestorm. The amount of heat and pressure that gets applied to individuals as you begin to work is unbelievable. Those who do not have that solid backbone and strength of character to do that will end up in trouble. We do not need that again here in Nevada. I will represent your values, your principles, and your ethics 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because I want you to know that you can be proud of the job that I'm doing, that I will represent you the entire time. I will reach back to you. I will live in Nevada. I will commute to Washington, and I will do what is necessary to make sure that our state becomes the greatest state in the U.S.
And this concludes our event for this evening. I want to thank our timekeeper, Tim. Thank you, good job. I want to thank all of the candidates that came out this evening. Now you can applaud. And more importantly, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight, getting involved, and please vote. That is your voice. I'm Karen from KYNE Radio. It has been a pleasure to be here with you tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, the candidates that came and put yourself on the line like that. I know it's hard to answer those questions, but we, the people, appreciate it. And please get out and vote. Like Karen said, it's your job to make sure that our state runs the way it's supposed to and that our country runs the way it's supposed to. You have the right, you have the vote. You need to get out and be responsible and vote responsibly. And I think tonight you saw the candidates, so you've been able to make a really good decision. I just wanted you to know that Kate Marshall was invited to come tonight. She did not respond to the request. So if you're wondering why she wasn't here, she did not respond. Thank you so much. Please go to www.trunconline.com and please donate to us if you'd like to see more events like this in the future.
Oh, don't forget Meals on Wheels.
And Meals on Wheels is still out there. The bucket's still there. And get your straw polls turned in. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Hey, maybe we'll run into each other another one of these sometime. Perhaps soon.
See you at Sonic.